Have you ever wondered what history has stolen from us? How many stories have been buried, erased, and forgotten, not because they weren't extraordinary, but because they were inconvenient? Rome was a world ruled by men, but beneath the marble statues and golden laurel wreaths, some women refused to be silenced. They changed history, and yet, their names are barely whispered. Let's change that. Because this is the story of 3 women, 3 warriors, leaders, and masterminds who defied the might of Rome itself. But be warned, not all of them survived it. To understand their struggle, you have to know this. Being a woman in ancient Rome meant being invisible. They couldn't vote, they couldn't hold power, they weren't even allowed to speak in the Senate. Their fates were tied to their fathers, their husbands, and if they were lucky, their sons. That was the rule. But some women, they found a way around it. They didn't just live in Rome, they fought it. And one of them, our first woman, would do the unthinkable. She would walk into the halls of power, face Rome's most powerful men, and make them listen. Rome was at war. It needed money. And so, the government did something it had never done before. It taxed the wealthiest women in Rome. But there was one problem. These women had no voice in politics, no vote, no representation. They were just expected to pay. Enter Hortensia. Born into a family of power and intellect, she was the daughter of Quintus Hortensius Hortulus, one of Rome's greatest orators. She inherited his sharp mind, his golden tongue, but she lived in a world where women weren't supposed to speak. So she did something no Roman woman had ever done. She walked into the Roman Forum. She stood before the men of the Senate. And then, she spoke. Her words were like fire. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She attacked. You refuse to give us power. You refuse to give us rights. But now you demand our money? The senators were stunned. A woman? Defying them in their own chambers? No one saw it coming. But she was not the only one who bent Rome to her will. Our second woman? She wouldn't need words. She ruled with something even more powerful: strategy. Rome was a battlefield. Not just swords and legions, but politics. And at the center of it all, a woman few saw coming. Her name was Julia Domna, and she wasn't born in Rome. She came from Syria, from a line of priests, scholars, and visionaries. She was intelligent, well-read, and ambitious. So ambitious that she caught the eye of one of Rome's most ruthless generals, Septimius Severus. He didn't just marry her, he believed in her. Because Julia wasn't just a wife, she was a strategist, a queenmaker, a shadow behind the throne. And when her husband became emperor, she became something even more dangerous: the real power behind Rome. But power in Rome was never safe. And Julia? She was walking on a knife's edge. Because what happens when you have more power than the men who rule an empire? What happens when even the emperor himself is no longer in control? But if Julia played the Game of Thrones with intelligence, our third woman, she would fight with fire and blood. Imagine this: a city burning, Roman soldiers lying dead in the streets, a woman, her hair wild, her eyes burning, riding through the wreckage. This was Boudica, and she was Rome's worst nightmare. She wasn't Roman. She was a queen of the Iceni, a Celtic tribe in Britain. Rome was supposed to be her ally, but when her husband died, Rome didn't honor its word. They took her land, they took her wealth, and worst of all, they took her daughters. That day, Rome thought they had broken her. Instead, they created a legend. Boudica swore vengeance. She didn't just fight back, she built an army, tens of thousands of warriors. And when they marched, Rome burned. City after city, legion after legion, she crushed them. And for the first time, Rome feared it could lose Britain forever. But did she win? Did she do the impossible and bring down the empire? Boudica made Rome bleed. She burned their cities, crushed their legions, and for a fleeting moment, Rome trembled. But the empire was a beast that refused to die. When the legions struck back, Her rebellion was overwhelmed. Some say she fell in battle, others that she drank poison rather than kneel. Rome claimed victory, but they never erased her. Her name became a war cry. Julia Domna played the empire like a game of chess. A queen in everything but title, she ruled from the shadows, outmaneuvering emperors and warlords alike. But Rome devours its own. When her sons turned on each other, the empire she held together shattered. And rather than live in its ruins, she chose her own fate. And Hortensia? In a world where women had no voice, she made Rome listen. She stood in the halls of power, her words cutting through centuries of silence. And against all odds, the Senate yielded. They reduced the tax. They bent, even if just for a moment. A woman had defied Rome, and won. They were not supposed to be remembered. But here we are, speaking their names. Because Rome may have conquered the world. But these women, they conquered Rome.